Hey everybody, today we are going to look at a deck from the 2010 format. Now, I've wanted to cover the 2010 format a little bit more. I know it's a very popular older format, and I think to really put a lot of other decks and lists into perspective, the first deck you really need to look at is going to be Gardevoir and Glade. And my list for this has made the rounds. I think I wrote a 6 prizes article on it, gosh, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and very little has changed with the deck. This is one of the lists I'm most proud of, and it has mostly become just the gold standard for Gardevoir in the 2010 format. Now, I will talk a little bit about the list. Some of this is mine. I also borrowed very heavily from Michael Pramwat's second place World's Finishing List, but I feel like there's a few spots that Michael just missed the mark on, and I'll cover those when we're talking about the deck here. So Gardevoir is going to be one of those decks where nothing in it in particular is broken, but when you piece it all together, it's to the point where I think it's a problem. Maybe I shouldn't even say problem, because this is one of my favorite decks of all time, but it's incredibly strong. So we'll cover a lot of the cards as we break down the video, and then how they kind of work their way into the deck and the format here. But the main strategy of the deck is we are going to be using Gardevoir to Psychic Lock the opponent, shutting off all their powers. We're going to be using Expert Belt to not only give our Gardevoir an extra 20 hit points, we're also going to give it that Psychic Lock an extra 20 damage. Is going to bump it up to 80 damage, basically guaranteeing we're going to two-shot whatever's in front of us. And then along with that, we're going to play Nidoqueen and Moonlight Stadium. So essentially what we are going to do is we're going to play the entire game. We're just going to be playing this retreat game, where send Gardevoir up, takes a hit, free retreat it back to a different Gardevoir, takes a hit, free retreat it back, different Gardevoir. Okay, that one takes a hit, back to the first Gardevoir. It's been 3 turns. It's had 60 damage healed off of it. All right, we send it up, hit the opponent, and we keep doing that. And while we keep doing that, the opponent is going to very slowly run out of resources, because they're not using any powers, they're not really drawing cards, they're not really getting anything going. They're just very, very slowly going to lose to this Psychic Lock. And as their options get fewer and fewer and fewer, ours are going to get more and more and more. And it is a very frustrating deck to play against. It feels very unfair to play against at times, but it's also why I consider it to be the best deck in the format. So let's go ahead and just jump right into the deck here, and we'll start breaking down the individual parts of it. Starting off here, we play 3 copies of Spirit Tomb. Now, Spirit Tomb is really essential to the deck for a couple of different reasons. One is it lets you search out your evolutions, but it also, the Pokebody Keystone Seal also stops your opponent from playing item cards. Now, in a format like 2010, where item cards are especially powerful and especially common, it's very, very important that you're able to get that set up, since you are playing a slower deck, that you're able to shut those off while you set up. Decks like SP decks are going to be a lot faster than you are, so you need to be able to not basically give up too many prizes before you get set up, and things like Energy Gain, Poke Turn, things like that can just do too many shenanigans with you to be okay. Now, a couple of things you do need to be careful here with Spirit Tomb is that it is colorless resistant, so there is some tricks the opponent can do with Chatot and using Chatter to basically just lock you active. This was something that would come up in 2010 occasionally. There's a couple of different things that you can do. You could play Warp Point or things like that, but generally it's not common enough that you really are too concerned about it. You just want to be aware of it, and if that does happen to you, the best solution is just to Darkness Grace to basically knock out Spirit Tomb by itself there. The other thing is we only play 3 copies of it. I would love a 4th copy in the deck. You simply make that cut for room. Next up, we play 4 copies of Ralts. Ralts is all around solid, 60 HP. Future Sight is actually an insanely good attack. Since you don't have, the format doesn't have a Rockets admin or an in, it's not something you're going to go to very often. But if you open with Rolts, it's probably about one of the most solid turn 1 plays you can make outside of Call Energy. If you're in a game where going Future Sight seems like a good play, then you're probably in a pretty bad spot, but it is nice to have that option there. Curlia, we play 2 copies of the Teleportation Burst. We do not play any of the Secret Wonders one. I had it at a 1-1 split for a while, but essentially, if you are in a spot where using Telekinesis or sniping the bench for 40 damage seemed like a good play, you probably weren't going to win that game anyways. While Teleportation Blast, on the other hand, hits for 30 damage, 50 damage with an Expert Belt, and you can switch it back to the bench. There is going to be a lot more common plays that are going to come up with it, such as, let's say you open Rolt's Call Energy, use your Call Energy, turn 2 to preserve your energy, you evolve to Curlia, use Teleportation Burst, switch back to like a Spirit Tomb or something on the bench. That way you're protecting your Curlia and shutting off their item cards. Situations like this aren't super common, but like I said, I felt like those situations would come up far more common in a game that you have a chance of winning. So that's the Curlia I want to play. If I'm not going to play a Curlia that's basically only useful in games I'm going to lose anyways. 3 copies of Gardevoir. Interesting ruling here is that you have to use Gardevoir. Gardevoir and Gardevoir X both count as Gardevoir. So between the two, you can only play 4 copies. Gardevoir does Psychic Lock for 60 damage, and your opponent can't use any powers next turn. This is absolutely devastating to almost every single deck in the format, because most decks in the format rely on powers to some extent, regardless if that's Claydal, Uxie, Unknown G, Time Walk, or SP decks, of course, with things like Bright Look and the Garchomp Healing's Breath. So being able to shut off powers is probably, I'm trying to think here, I'm not going to say it's the most broken attack that's ever existed, but it's probably in my top 10 very easily. And then Telepass does search your opponent's discard pile for a supporter card, use it as your own, and that does not count as your supporter for the turn, so you can use your opponent's supporter plus your own. Once you hit that first Gardevoir, you just have an unbelievable amount of consistency. I do want to note here, if Gardevoir had a weakness, or if I had to point anything out here, it's going to be the low 110 hit points, and then the 30 damage to Psychic. Psychic is very common in the format. A good tactic that Luxchamp will use or other decks is Uxie level X with Lucario GL to try to get that double damage, knock out your Gardevoir. We have some counter plays to it, so don't worry, but those are the 2 big weaknesses that you've got to really be aware of. Now, Gardevoir level X here it adds a lot to the deck here. So first off, it adds 20 hit points. This is monumental in changing knockouts. Between the difference in 20 health is just unbelievably huge, especially when we start factoring in things like Nidoqueen's Maternal Comfort and stuff like that. Teleportation is basically a switch. You can either put Gardevoir level X from the active to the bench or from the bench to the active spot. I do want to note Gardevoir has to be active for you to level it up, so just as a heads up on that one. And then bring down, choose one of your opponent's Pokemon choose the Pokemon with the lowest health in play, and you automatically knock it out. This is a great way to kind of finish off games, but it's not going to be a go-to strategy. You're not going to start using Bring Down at 6 prizes each on stuff. So just a heads up on that. Glade uses Sonic Blade. So Glade has 2 attacks here. The first one's Sonic Blade. We actually don't even play the energy to use it. We're not concerned about that. We're not worried about it at all. The other one is Psychic Cut. It does 60 damage. Plus, you can flip any number of your prize cards. It hits for 20 more damage for each prize you flip. So just Glade can hit for 180 damage. What makes this so strong is the Gardevoir has a very low damage output. It has 60 damage or 80 with an extra, which I shouldn't say is low, but you're not going to be one-hitting anything with that. Glade gives you the ability to one-hit KO things on your opponent's side of the board. So if they're putting a lot of investment in something, like let's say a Torterra or a Steelix or something like that, Glade's able to come out, flip your prizes, knock it out, and then you can transition into a Psychic Lock sort of strategy to in the mid to late game. Now, I'm going to say generally, I try to Psychic Lock as much and often as possible, but you will, in certain matchups, need to weave Glade into your prize exchanges. Then we play a 1/1/1 Dusknoir line. We do play the Reaper Cloth Duskull, so we can go Duskull into Dustclops in the exact same turn. You can make an argument to play the shiny Dustclops, but the situations where you're going to take games off your opponent with like them opening Hoppit or a Magikarp, for example, is going to be incredibly rare. Now, the Dustclops is a Michael Pramawat tech, and the idea behind it is in a lot of, let's say, matchups, players are going to try to set up behind Spirit Tomb, both in Mirror, Curse, stuff like that. And the idea is your opponent is most likely going to fill their bench thinking that they are safe from Dusknoir, because at the time, most players only played a 1/1 Dusknoir. In this situation, this allowed Michael Pramawat to create a Dusknoir under a Spirit Tomb lock so he could start Dark Palming the opponent. What this forced the opponent to do is to go aggressive and make aggressive plays sooner than maybe they would have been ready to do in the first place. Best case scenario, you get an amazing Dark Palm off. Worst case scenario, you're just changing how they play the game. Now, I will say in 2010, this was a major shock factor. However, in today's meta, this is pretty common and pretty well expected. I will say, because players are better at playing this, they're better at playing around it. I think you can make an argument to actually play the Nidorina over the Dustclops, just because getting Nidoqueen out is essential in almost all of your matchups. Next up, we play a 1/1 Nidoqueen line. Nidoqueen is, if I had to go through and choose the most broken bodies in the game, Pokebodies in the game, Nidoqueen is definitely in my top 10 as well. Essentially, it heals 10 damage from all your Pokemon in between turns. It makes any sort of spread strategy absolutely useless against you. It also completely changes knockouts, because whatever damage your opponent does to you, by the time it gets back to them, it's going to be 20 less. So let's use a very common example that'll come up with the deck. Let's say we have a Gardevoir level X active with an Expert Belt, so it has 150 hit points. We are using Psychic Lock. The opponent comes up with a Garchomp level X, they hit us for 80 damage, trying to two-shot us. Now, we have 150 health, 80 times 2, 160. They should be able to knock us out on the next turn. However, if we have Nidoqueen in play, at the end of their turn, we're at 70. We take our turn. At the end of our turn, we are down to 60. And then we are going to use Psychic Lock. So they're not allowed to use Crobat to find that extra 10 damage. Third turn, they hit us for 80 again. We're only at 140, and we are safe. Now, like I said, Nidoqueen is just, it's unbelievable. Baltoy, Claydal, we only play a 1/1 line here. It helps a little bit that we do have Gardevoir and Telepass, so we don't need as much consistency as other decks do. And we play so many ways to search it out that it is relatively easy for us to find that Claydal line when we need it. If we do end up prizing it, we can either dig it out with a Zelf, or we can just play without it. Next up, we play one copy of a Zelf. A Zelf is great for getting things out of the prizes. One of the biggest things in this format is you need to be able to know what is prized. It is probably more important in this format than a lot of other formats. Next up, we play one copy of a Zelf level X. The level X is just huge for turning off your Psychic weakness. It's one of the components of the deck that just makes it so strong, especially in Mirror Match in particular. The ability to shut off your weakness. Deep Balance is also very, very useful. You can choose one of your opponent's Pokemon, put one damage counter on it for each energy attached to all of your opponent's Pokemon. It's not something you're going to be doing very often, but it is something where if you are searching for a knockout or something like that, it is an option that you have available to you. The easiest way to get a Zelf level X into play is usually to get your Guardian level X into play first, and then teleport back to the Zelf, Moonlight Stadium, and then level up and retreat. You can also just manually pay the retreat cost. The other option that does come up in certain matchups is, for example, if you're playing against another Gardevoir deck and you know they don't play Warp Point, you can actually lock up their Spirit Tomb and then for a turn, and then level up on your following turn and then retreat. So those are the most common ways to do it. We play a single copy of Uxie. For the setup power, of course, it's very easy for us to grab off Roseanne's, and then, of course, the Psychic Restore. We can get it out of play if we need to. We're not going to be doing that very often, but it is great to free up a bench spot, or if we need to knock out a Gengar without triggering the fainting spell flip. 1 copy of Unknown G, ton of different uses, mainly to protect your Claydal. It's also very useful in the Gengar matchup, of course. Certain matchups you would like a second one, but it's generally just not worth the space to play it. Moving into the trainer lineup here, we play 4 copies of BBs, 4 copies of Roseanne's Research. Those are going to be your staples. Not only are they awesome supporters to play, they're also able to be played under Spirit Tomb. You can afford to take a slightly slower approach with BB Search over some of the higher Pokemon communication counts you'll see in some of my other decks, due to the fact that you can use Telepass to copy your opponent's supporter as well. So BB Search is going to be able to search out those important evolutions. You can also grab Uxie in a pinch. It is worth noting that it puts a card from your hand back into the deck, so this will allow you bigger setups and bigger cosmic powers if you play it right. Sometimes that does take a little bit of careful resource management, but I've never really had any issues where putting the card back has hurt me that badly. 4 copies of Roseanne's Research, and along with your 4 call energy, this gives you 8 good outs to get a solid opener. If you do open with something other than Spirit Tomb, it's very easy to search out, let's say, a Roseanne's and a Psychic Energy, and then manually retreat that Spirit Tomb back to the rolls, and then start using your Darkness Grace, or whatever you did have active. Next up, 3 copies of Judge. Judge just works so well in combination with Psychic Lock, because it's very, very hard. There's not a lot of straight draw cards in this format, so it's incredibly hard for your opponent to get their hand size back up once you put it at a smaller hand size. They're not going to be able to use their powers. They're not going to be able to use Cosmic Power. They're not going to be able to use Setup. So usually they are stuck at a lower hand size. It is not worth playing the 1 copy of Lookers or 2 copies of Lookers. Just don't do it. Stick with the 3 copies of Judges. The difference between 4 cards and 5 is absolutely huge. Also, a lot of the time you are going to play down all your own resources before you shovel your hand in your deck, so getting 4 new cards off Judge is usually very beneficial to you as well. 4 copies of Rare Candy. We are playing 3 Stage 2s in the deck, so the 4 copies of Rare Candy are incredibly useful. 3 copies of Expert Belt. This is an absolute must. You need to be able to find your Expert Belts when you need them. You need to see them early. You need to see them often. Do not go below 3. I cringe a little bit whenever I see decks from 2010 that don't play 3 Expert Belts. I would say almost every deck that plays Expert Belt, with some very minor exceptions, should be playing at least 3 Expert Belt. 1 Pokemon Communication. It was either this or a Luxury Ball. I find Pokemon Communication to be a little bit stronger. I think we play 25 Pokemon in the deck, and being able to search out level X's is very important, whether that be the Guardy or the Azelf level X. I also want to note it's also very useful with Cosmic Power, where you can put something back that might not be very good, say a Spirit Tomb or something you just don't need in your hand, to get that extra draw off Cosmic Power. I have never regretted playing the 1 Communication over at Luxury Ball in this deck. 1 copy of Night Maintenance. The 1 copy of Night Maintenance plays fine. It does take a little bit of careful management. You just got to kind of be aware of your resources, since we do only play 1 copy. You can make a small argument to play Town Volunteers, but it's not, or I'm sorry, not Town Volunteers. I'm playing too much 2004 lately. Palmer's Contribution. There is, to play one of supporters like that, there is a little bit of argument to the logic, because you can telepass your opponent's Cyrus to get the one of supporter like Palmer's and then play the Palmer's. But generally speaking, it's not worth doing. Just stick with 1 copy of Night Maintenance. 2 Moonlight Stadiums. It just allows the deck so much freedom to retreat. It allows the deck so much freedom to not get certain things stuck in the active spot. Your opponent's not going to be able to reversal up your Nidoqueen or whatever and just leave it stuck there. It also combos very well in, say, the Gyarados matchup, where you can make some big plays as far as knocking out a Gyarados and replacing the stadium in the certain same turn, along with a Judge, leaving your opponent at 4 cards to try to find a broken time space. The Gyarados matchup in particular, it is worth an argument to play a 3rd Moonlight, but generally it's just not going to be worth the spot in a majority of your matchups. The energy lineup here, we are going to play 5 Psychic, 4 Call Energy, 4 Double Colorless Energy. The 4 Call is just absolutely essential to our setup. Combined with the 4 Roseanne's Research and the 4 BB Search, it just gives us so many options to get an incredibly strong turn 1 setup, and then just to set up from there. The 4 double colorless energy also combos exceptionally well in the deck. It works great with both Gardevoir Psychic Lock and Glade Psychic Cut, and in a pinch we can use it on Nidoqueen's Ruthless Tail. I also want to note, if you do find yourself in a situation where your opponent dragged up a Claydal, you can also just use double colorless energy to retreat. It just has so many uses in the deck. 5 Psychic Energy. This just fills out the rest of our lineup here. I'm going to say it does take a little bit of careful playing. You've got to be aware of your Psychic Energies and make sure you've got them, but I've never had too many issues where I've ran out of Psychic Energy or anything like that, especially playing that one copy of Night Maintenance that we talked about earlier. Alright, so this is going to be Gardevoir for the 2010 format. I am going to call this deck the best deck in the format by a pretty large margin. If there is one deck from 2010 you are going to learn to play, I would definitely recommend it being Gardevoir. Not only is it a ton of fun to play, but there's so many little intricacies to the deck that it'll give even the best players a challenge to completely master it. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and of course I hope to see you in the next video.